Cross now straight to Kyiv. In fact, we're going to speak to our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons, who's joining us now from Maidan Square in Kyiv. Rob, let's talk about that condemnation that's been pouring in, first of all, that Philip was talking about. I mean, as we were saying there, sanctions is one thing, isn't it? But, of course, President Volodymyr Zelensky may have been hoping for rather more than just sanctions at this stage.
Well, maybe, but I think it's been made clear to Volodymyr Zelensky that there will not be anything more than that. You know, Joe Biden is trying to mobilize the international community, which seems genuinely shocked by what's happened. Even the Chinese responding negatively towards the Russian move. But, you know, in terms of any other sort of aid, and by that I presume you mean military aid, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Joe Biden has made it categorically clear that there will be no American military boots on the ground in Ukraine. There will be no NATO presence in Ukraine. That's dismaying, I imagine, for Volodymyr Zelensky. He knows that his people are going to have to fight this war by themselves, at least at this stage. He said in an address to the Ukrainian people last night, the army is good, I am with you, we're ready for this, we'll all fight. But, you know, the Ukrainian army is untested. A few years ago, 2014, when Ukraine was invaded first by Russia, the army was in a very poor state, very small, very poorly equipped, discipline was bad. 8 years later, it's certainly changed. It's much bigger, it's much better equipped, it's much better trained than it was. But this is a test of the kind it's never experienced before. And we simply don't know how things are going to go. We do know that the international community now will pour sanctions, much heavier sanctions on Russia. Those in place before were there as a deterrent. Any further sanctions now are going to be punitive. And I don't think there's much doubt that they will hit the Russian economy. The sanctions in place since 2014 have hurt the Russian economy. These will be much more severe. Quite how severe, who knows? But will they be enough to deter the Russians? I think the answer to that is no. Vladimir Putin has made up his mind. But these sanctions, when they come in, will hurt ordinary Russians as well as the leadership.
You mentioned ordinary Russians there, Rob. We've been getting some images and hearing about some of the traffic jams from people trying to escape Kyiv from where you are at the moment. It looks pretty quiet from behind you as it did earlier on when we last spoke to you. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a sense of panic in the city, but at the same time, a lot of people have made that decision. It's time to leave.
Yeah, I think it's right to say, Stuart, that there isn't a sense of panic. You know, you see people out walking their dogs and that sort of thing. I stopped and chatted to a couple who are out with their dogs. One of them with one of the dogs with a Ukrainian flag coat on it. They seemed pretty unconcerned, I have to say. You know, they said they'd heard it all before. That you know there had been warnings that the Russians were going to invade. They didn't believe it. You know, I said, well, it seems pretty clear that the Russians are invading this time. They said, OK, well, we'll see. But it's true that a lot of people are trying to leave Kyiv. The centre, as you point out, is very quiet at the moment. There are no traffic jams. That may be because people have been told to stay at home. But, you know, outside the city, you know, on the roads leading away from Kyiv, apparently there are traffic jams. Whether that's because the Ukrainian police are putting in roadblocks or whether it's because of the number of people trying to get away is not clear from where I am at the moment. But I do know that there's a shortage of petrol at the petrol stations, that people are probably having difficulties filling up their cars if they're trying to get away. But, you know, overall, I would say at this stage, despite the fact that the government has made clear that the situation is acute, that martial law has been introduced not very long ago, about half an hour ago, we had military aircraft flying over the city. There isn't a sense of panic here just yet.
Rob, just really briefly, if you can, I know this is a region that you've covered for years. You've been a former Moscow correspondent as well. What's your feeling today about how this is going to go and what Putin is trying to get out of this, how far he might go?
Well, you know, I think that You know, those who follow this closely in Ukraine and around the world are genuinely shocked by what has happened. They assumed, I think, that the very most that Vladimir Putin would attempt would be to slice off part of Ukraine. But it's quite clear, you know, judging first of all by that speech he made the other day and the one he made overnight to justify what's happening now, that he's prepared to go much further than that, that this is a real invasion of Ukraine, an attempt at regime change. He says he wants to end what he calls the Nazification of Ukraine. It's outrageous. There is no Nazification going on in Ukraine. There's no militarization of Ukraine. He says he wants to end the militarization. He says he wants to defend the people of Donbass against Ukrainian militarism. It is all nonsense. It's not. There is none of that. But, you know, it's quite clear that these are excuses that Vladimir Putin has decided that he will use. And there is no doubt this is going to change Europe for decades to come. This is probably the biggest threat to world peace, certainly in Europe, since the end of the Second World War.
Rob, thanks very much. Rob Parsons, our chief foreign editor there, speaking to us from Kyiv.